They divided us like we were objects. My father said, "I'll take the boy." My mother answered, "Then the girl stays with me." And me? I was left behind, without a choice, without a voice, without a family. They sent me into the system where no one asks what you want, where your name becomes a case number, and your life is just a file on someone else's desk. I remember the door closing behind me, the cold silence of that new room swallowing me whole. Back then, I thought nothing could hurt more, that being abandoned by my own parents was the limit of pain. But I was wrong. Because years later, they all suddenly remembered me. And it wasn't out of love. It wasn't regret. No. Each of them had their own reason, their own greed, their own way of trying to use me again. That's when I realized, this time, I wasn't a pawn anymore. This time I held the cards, and I had my own plans. I grew up with the echo of slammed doors and whispered arguments, but no one prepared me for the silence of being left behind. When my father drove away with my brother, I stood on the porch clutching a plastic bag with my clothes, watching taillights fade into the distance like they were carrying away the last trace of belonging. My mother didn't even look back when she took my sister. Her perfume lingered longer than her presence. I was 12 years old when a social worker with a clipboard said, "You're coming with me." And that was it. No hugs, no explanations, just the shuffle of papers and the metallic click of the car door. State care is not what people think. It's not safety. It's survival. You learn to keep your shoes by your bed because you don't know if you'll need to run in the night. You learn that birthday cakes are made from whatever mix is cheapest on sale, and that sometimes they forget your birthday altogether. You learn to smile at strangers because maybe, just maybe, one of them will decide you're worth keeping. I was passed around like furniture no one wanted. Each home had its rules, its walls painted over with too many coats to hide the cracks, its version of love that never quite stretched far enough to reach me. But in the quiet corners of those houses, I promised myself something. If my family ever came back for me, they would not find the girl they abandoned. They would meet someone sharper, someone stronger, someone who had already survived everything they thought would break me. And when the years passed, when the phone rang and familiar names appeared again, it wasn't warmth I felt, it was fire. Because every smile they offered, every outstretched hand came laced with calculation. They didn't want me back. They wanted something from me, and I was ready to make them pay for every single night I fell asleep wishing someone would choose me. I was 17 when I aged out of the system, standing in front of the group home with a trash bag holding the only things I owned. No parents, no safety net, no one waiting. Just me, a bus ticket, and the hard truth that the world doesn't care if you sink or swim. I worked anywhere that would take me. Diners, cleaning shifts, late nights at a gas station where the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than the customers spoke. I saved every dollar, learned to stretch rice and beans into a week's worth of meals, and took classes at night because knowledge was the only inheritance I could give myself. And slowly, painfully, I built a life. By 25, I wasn't rich, but I had something more valuable. Stability. A small apartment with my name on the lease. A job that paid enough to cover bills without panic. Friends who became the family I never had. People who actually showed up when I needed them. For years, I believed I had left the past behind, that the scars of abandonment were just part of my skin now, not my soul. But then, like ghosts knocking at the door, my family reappeared. First, it was my brother, calling out of nowhere, his voice smooth, rehearsed, asking how I'd been and sliding in the fact that he had a little financial trouble. Then my sister, suddenly nostalgic, wanting to meet for coffee and remind me of childhood games we played, only to confess halfway through the latte that she needed help paying rent. And finally, my parents. The same parents who once chose sides like children in a playground fight. They showed up together, older, softer around the edges, speaking with a careful tone like they were actors in a play. They said words like family, reunion, fresh start, forgive the past. But I knew better. I saw it in their eyes, the same calculating glint I remembered from the day they divided us like property. And when the truth came out, When I discovered what they actually wanted from me, I felt the years of silence tighten around my chest like chains. They weren't here for love. They weren't here for me. They were here for what I had built without them. And that's when I decided if they thought they could use me again, they had no idea who I had become. It started small. Little requests that seemed harmless enough if you didn't know the history. My brother called again, saying his business had hit a rough patch and he just needed a loan, just a few thousand, just until things picked up. He talked fast, like he was trying to sell me something, and when I didn't immediately agree, his tone shifted, sharp, almost accusing. "Come on, you're family, aren't you?" My sister wasn't any different. She texted pictures of her kids, my niece and nephew I'd never even met, their smiles like bait on a hook. "Don't you want to be part of their lives?" she asked, before dropping the line about overdue bills, about how just a little help could make such a difference. And then came my parents. They didn't ask for money, not directly. Instead, they told me about a property, the house my grandparents had left behind. I never knew much about it, just that it had been sitting for years, untouched, waiting for probate to be settled. But now, suddenly, they remembered me. Remembered that my name was on those papers too. They wanted me to sign it over, to give up my share, to erase myself from the inheritance like I'd been erased from the family all those years ago. I sat there at the kitchen table, their voices blending into one another, promises of togetherness, of healing, of what's best for everyone. And all I could think was, where were you when I cried myself to sleep at 12? Where were you when I blew out birthday candles alone? Where were you when I needed someone to tell me I mattered? The truth settled in my chest like iron. They didn't see me as a daughter, a sister, a person. They saw me as leverage, as access, as an obstacle standing between them and what they wanted. That's when I knew. If I gave them an inch, they would take my entire life. And this time, I wasn't going to let them. I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no that night. I just listened, nodding while they laid out their plan like it was already decided. My father talked about how keeping the house in the family was the honorable thing to do. My mother added that since I hadn't contributed to maintaining it over the years, it was only fair I step aside. My brother and sister chimed in about how much work they'd done, how many family sacrifices they'd made. The irony nearly made me laugh, because the truth was, none of them had lifted a finger for that property. They just wanted to sell it and split the profit 3 ways, without me. I excused myself from the table, went home, and dug through every drawer, every file I had until I found the letter, the one I had received on my 18th birthday from a lawyer I barely remembered meeting. The letter that explained my grandparents hadn't just left behind the house, they'd left behind a trust. And in that trust, my name wasn't an afterthought. It was the centerpiece, because of the years I spent in state care, because of the abandonment my grandparents had written specifically that my portion could not be signed away or transferred without my direct, informed consent. And more than that, I wasn't just a beneficiary. I was listed as co-owner. Half of that house, half of that land, half of that future. It was mine, no matter what they wanted. When I confronted them with the documents, the air went still. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's smile froze. My siblings glanced at each other like children caught stealing. The silence stretched until finally my brother said, "So what? You're really going to hold this over us? After everything?" And in that moment, the weight of all those years came rushing back. But this time, it didn't crush me. It fueled me. Because for the first time, I wasn't the powerless child they left behind. I was the one holding the pen, the one with the signature they couldn't move forward without. And I intended to make them understand what that meant. The mask slipped fast after that. Gone were the soft voices and the talk of family unity. My father leaned forward, his eyes hard, and said, "Don't be selfish. You don't even need this. We've been the ones keeping everything together." My mother tried her version of guilt, clutching her chest, shaking her head, saying how heartbroken she was that I would turn against my own blood. My brother raised his voice, accusing me of being ungrateful, reminding me how he'd once looked out for me when we were kids, as if sharing a sandwich 20 years ago excused everything. My sister cried, real tears spilling as she begged me not to ruin the family over money. But the words didn't land. They ricocheted off the walls I had spent years building inside myself. I remembered every night I sat awake in a stranger's house wondering why no one wanted me. I remembered birthdays with no candles, Christmas mornings with no gifts, the way I trained myself not to hope because hope hurt too much. And now, here they were. Not to apologize, not to make amends, but to demand I give them the only thing that proved I hadn't been erased completely. My answer was calm, steady, final. No. Just that one word, but it sliced through the room like glass. My father's face flushed red. My mother whispered something about, after all we've done, though I couldn't think of a single thing. My brother slammed his fist on the table, while my sister choked on sobs. But I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging for a seat at their table. I was flipping the table over. And as I stood to leave, I told them plainly, "This is mine. You don't get to take from me anymore." Walking out that door, hearing their stunned silence behind me, felt like the first real victory of my life. But what I didn't realize yet was that saying no wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because people like them, they don't accept boundaries. They push harder. And I was about to see just how far they'd go. The phone calls came first. Every day, multiple times from different numbers. My brother's angry voice one minute, my sister's pleading the next, then my mother leaving voicemails full of sniffles and half sobs about how I was destroying the family. When I stopped answering, the messages turned uglier. My father's threats slipped in, sharp and cold. "You'll regret this. You think a piece of paper makes you strong?" They thought they could wear me down, drown me in their noise. But I had learned long ago how to survive silence, and I could survive theirs too. Then came the letters. Official-looking envelopes, stamped with legal symbols. At first, I panicked, my chest tightening as I unfolded each page. They claimed I had no right, that I was misunderstanding the documents, that my signature wasn't needed. They hired a lawyer, someone slick and expensive, to scare me into giving in. But they underestimated me, because I had spent years reading every line of that trust, memorizing every clause, every condition. I had my own lawyer, one who knew my story, who reminded me I wasn't powerless. When we filed the paperwork, when we sent the certified response that laid out in black and white exactly what my rights were, their silence afterward was almost satisfying. Almost, until they showed up in person. One Saturday morning, I opened my door to find all four of them standing there. My father in front, arms crossed, my mother hovering at his side, my siblings just behind. They didn't ask to come in. They pushed their way inside like it was still their right. The air crackled with tension as they circled me in my own living room, voices overlapping, accusations, guilt trips, demands. And then my father said, the words that made everything clear, "You owe us." That was it. Not love, not reconciliation, not even respect. Just a claim, like I was still a child they could command. But I wasn't. I stood tall, my voice even, and said, "No, I don't. Not anymore. Not ever again." And for the first time, I saw something flicker in their faces. Fear. Because they realized the girl they abandoned was gone. And the woman, standing before them, was not someone they could control. They left that day, but not quietly. My father slammed the door so hard the frame shook, and my mother's voice carried down the hall, cursing me for being cold-hearted. My brother muttered something about lawyers, my sister about karma, as if I was the one who had wronged them. For a moment, I just stood there in the silence, my chest heaving, my hands trembling. Not from fear, but from the sheer release of finally standing my ground. Yet I knew it wasn't over. People like them don't retreat. They regroup. And sure enough, within weeks, I heard whispers through mutual acquaintances, stories they were spreading about me. According to them, I was greedy, unstable, poisoned by resentment. They painted me as the villain, the ungrateful child who turned her back on the family that raised her. Raised me! I laughed bitterly when I heard that. They hadn't raised me, they had abandoned me. But rumors are powerful, and soon friends of friends began asking careful questions, tilting their heads as if trying to see the truth behind the gossip. I held my ground, kept my circle close, and told my story only to those who had earned the right to hear it. And then the letter came. Official again, this time summoning me to court. They were suing me for the inheritance. My grandparents had left specifically to protect me. Their claim was laughable, but seeing my name in that cold print, seeing their names on the other side, still made my stomach twist. The court date arrived. I walked into that room in a plain black dress, my documents neatly stacked, my lawyer steady at my side. Across the aisle sat my family, my father glaring, my mother dabbing at imaginary tears, my siblings whispering to each other. For a moment, I felt the weight of every memory pressing down, threatening to suffocate me. But then I remembered 12 years old, standing on the porch with nothing but a bag of clothes. I remembered 17, leaving the group home alone. I remembered every night I built myself from the ground up. And I lifted my head, met their eyes, and thought, you don't get to win this time. This time, I do. The trial stretched on longer than I expected. Their lawyer spun tales about sacrifice and unity, about how my parents had carried the weight of the family while I distanced myself, as though being abandoned was a choice I had made. They called witnesses, family friends who parroted the same rehearsed lines about my parents being pillars of strength, my siblings being loyal, and me being bitter. It stung, hearing strangers paint me as some villain. But I stayed quiet, my hands folded, my face calm, because I knew the truth wasn't in their words, it was in the papers I carried. When it was our turn, my lawyer presented everything: the original trust, the clause written in my grandparents' hand, the explicit condition that half the property belonged to me and could not be transferred without my signed consent. He laid out the timeline of abandonment, the state records proving I had been left in care while my siblings were taken. Piece by piece, the picture became clear. They hadn't raised me, they hadn't sacrificed for me, they had discarded me. My lawyer's voice didn't rise, didn't tremble, he just let the documents speak. And when he handed the judge the letter I had received on my 18th birthday, the one where my grandparents had written that I was not to be forgotten, I saw the shift. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, lips pressed tight. The silence in that courtroom was different from the silence of my childhood. This one wasn't empty. It was heavy, expectant, waiting for a verdict. My father fumed, my mother whispered frantic prayers, my siblings avoided my gaze. I sat there steady, my heart pounding, but my back straight, knowing that no matter what they threw at me, I wasn't the child left behind anymore. And then the judge spoke. His words were measured, but they landed like thunder. The trust is clear. The defendant is entitled to half. This court upholds her rights fully. In that moment, I watched the blood drain from my family's faces, the smirks and bravado collapse into panic. For once, they couldn't twist the truth. For once, they lost. When the gavel struck, it should have ended there. But my family wasn't built to accept defeat. They lingered outside the courthouse, huddled together like a cornered pack, their whispers sharp and bitter. I walked past them without slowing, but I could feel their eyes burning into me. The very next week, the phone calls started again, this time not to plead or threaten, but to bargain. My brother offered to buy me out, his tone slick with false generosity. My sister sent long texts about how keeping the house in the family was a legacy I shouldn't ruin. My mother mailed me letters, written in her looping script, each one dripping with guilt, invoking God, tradition, and blood ties. My father's message was simpler. You'll regret this. But I didn't. For once, I didn't carry the weight of their needs or their anger. Instead, I leaned into the truth I had carried since childhood. They chose to leave me. They made me into someone who had to survive alone, and survival had sharpened me in ways they couldn't understand. I kept the property, not to spite them, not to hold power over them, but because it was mine, and I refused to be erased again. I started restoring the house slowly, piece by piece. At first, it was just a quiet place to escape, but over time, it became something more, a home that belonged to me in every sense. Friends visited, Laughter filled the rooms. Warmth spread where emptiness had lived for so long. And still, my family circled like vultures. They showed up unannounced, peering through the fence, muttering about family rights. My father once cornered me in the driveway, his face red, his voice shaking as he spat out, "After all we've done, you think you deserve this?" I looked him dead in the eye and answered, "I deserve everything you thought I never would." He didn't speak after that. They tried again through legal loopholes, dragging me into hearings, filing appeals that went nowhere. Each time they lost a little more credibility, a little more money, a little more face in the community. Neighbors stopped believing their stories. Relatives began to question their version of events. And slowly, the tide shifted. They were no longer the proud family who had cast me out. They were the desperate ones who couldn't wrest control. From the daughter they abandoned. And in their unraveling, I found something I never expected. Peace. Not forgiveness, because some wounds cut too deep for that, but peace in knowing I had broken their cycle. They couldn't take from me anymore. They couldn't silence me. They couldn't pretend I didn't exist. The house stood as proof, as stone and wood testimony that I was still here, that I had survived, that I had won, and as much as they tried to claw it back, they couldn't change that. For the first time in my life, the power was mine. The day the final appeal was denied, I drove out to the property alone. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the porch where my grandparents once sat, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like mine. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and inhaled the scent of old wood mixed with fresh paint, of history blending with renewal. I thought about the girl I had been, the child clutching a plastic bag of clothes, the teenager aging out of a system that had no space for tenderness, the young woman working 3 jobs just to prove she mattered. She had carried so much loneliness, so much fear. But she had also carried something stronger, the will to endure. And now, standing in the home they never wanted me to have, I realized I wasn't just enduring anymore. I was living. My family never stopped trying to claw their way back in. Even after losing every legal battle, they tried softer methods. Christmas cards left unsigned, photos of nieces and nephews slipped into my mailbox, invitations to reunions written with shaky attempts at affection. Each one was a reminder that their version of family was conditional, transactional, hollow. I never responded. I didn't need to. I had built my own family, not by blood, but by choice. Friends who showed up, neighbors who waved through the fence, people who saw me as more than a signature on a page. That was real. That was mine. Some nights I sat on the porch under the stars, imagining what my grandparents would say if they could see me now. I liked to think they'd be proud, not because I had fought and won, but because I hadn't let bitterness define me. My revenge hadn't been loud or cruel. It was steady, deliberate, undeniable. It was the simple fact that after everything, I was still here. I was still standing. And I had claimed what was mine. The truth is, revenge doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it's standing in the home your family tried to take, with keys in your hand and no one left to answer to. Sometimes it's looking in the mirror and seeing strength where they expected only ruin. My family thought they could erase me, divide me out of existence, but in the end, I was the one who held it all together. Not for them. Never again for them. For me, for the life I chose, for the peace I created, for the woman I became. And as the night settled in around the house, I whispered the words I'd been waiting my whole life to say, I am enough, and I am free.